February 1945. Dawn breaks cold and gray over the port of Boston Harbor. The air smells of salt and diesel fuel. A Liberty ship, hull rusted and scarred from the Atlantic crossing, groans against the pier. Inside its belly, 317 German soldiers stand in the semi-darkness, shoulder to shoulder, breathing the stale odor of sweat, fear, and unwashed wool. They have not bathed in weeks. Some have not removed their boots in a month. Their uniforms are stiff with dried mud from the Ardennes, crusted with the grime of foxholes and frozen forest floors. Their skin itches, their scalps crawl. Their teeth are coated in film. They are soldiers of the Wehrmacht, men of the Third Reich, and they are now prisoners of the United States Army. The steel doors swing open, light floods in. American MPs, clean-shaven and smelling faintly of aftershave, motion them forward with gloved hands. The Germans shuffle onto the dock, blinking like men emerging from a cave. They expect barbed wire. They expect dogs. They expect brutality. What they do not expect is the smell, clean, soapy, faintly chemical, that drifts from the transport trucks idling nearby. One prisoner, a corporal from Bavaria named Joseph Bauer, would later write in his diary that the Americans smelled like they had been scrubbed with lye and wrapped in fresh linen. It was the first shock. It would not be the last. To understand the transformation that was about to occur, one must first understand what these men had been taught. In the barracks of the Wehrmacht, in the indoctrination camps of the Hitler Youth, in the propaganda films of the Third Reich, cleanliness was secondary to hardness. The Nazi ideology glorified the ascetic warrior, the man who could endure cold, hunger, and filth without complaint. Joseph Goebbels himself had written that the German soldier was forged in iron, tempered by deprivation. To complain of dirt was to show weakness. To desire comfort was to betray the Volksgemeinschaft, the people's community that demanded sacrifice above all. The soldiers of the Wehrmacht had internalized this doctrine. Many had spent years on the Eastern Front, where hot water was a distant memory and lice were constant companions. They had learned to sleep in mud, to eat with unwashed hands, to ignore the smell of their own bodies. They had been told that this was the price of greatness. That the soft democracies of the West, especially America, had grown weak and decadent through luxury. American soldiers, they were assured, were coddled, effeminate, incapable of true sacrifice. The propaganda films showed Americans as fat, lazy, obsessed with refrigerators and Hollywood starlets. The German soldier, by contrast, was lean, disciplined, willing to suffer for the fatherland, and yet here they were, defeated. The men on that dock in Boston had surrendered in the forests of Belgium, or been captured in the rubble of the Ruhr, or pulled half-frozen from the snow of the Hurtgen forest. They had expected execution, or at minimum, the kind of treatment they themselves had meted out in the East. They had heard stories whispered in bunkers and aid stations of Soviet camps where prisoners starved, of French civilians who spat on captured Germans, of British interrogators who were coldly efficient. But America was an unknown. They had no reference point, and so they prepared themselves for the worst, armoring their minds with the ideology that had sustained them through the war. Hardness, endurance, contempt for softness. They were about to learn that ideology, like armor, can crack when confronted with reality. The convoy of trucks rolls westward from Boston, through the gray industrial towns of Massachusetts, toward a prisoner of war camp in the rural interior. The Germans sit in silence, watching through the canvas flaps as the American landscape unfolds. They see clean streets. They see houses with intact roofs and glass windows. They see children walking to school, plump and rosy-cheeked, carrying lunch pails. They see shops with signs advertising goods, meat, bread, butter, things that have been rationed or unavailable in Germany for years. One prisoner, a sergeant named Hans Dressler, would later recall his astonishment at seeing a woman hanging laundry in her backyard. The sheets were white, brilliantly white, whiter than any fabric he had seen since before the war. It seemed impossible. How could a nation at war afford such cleanliness? The truck pulls through the gates of Camp Devens, a sprawling facility of wooden barracks surrounded by chain-link fencing. The Germans are lined up in rows. An American officer, speaking through a translator, informs them of the camp rules. They will be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. They will receive 3 meals a day. They will be allowed to write letters. They will work, but only at non-military labor. And then the officer says something that causes a ripple of confusion. You will shower and be deloused immediately. Fresh uniforms will be issued. Shower. The word hangs in the air. For many of these men, the last time they showered was months ago, in some field shower unit behind the lines, where the water was cold and the soap was harsh, carbolic that stripped the skin. For others, the last real bath was in civilian life, before the war. They have grown accustomed to the smell of themselves, to the itch of lice, to the grease in their hair. They do not expect much. Perhaps a bucket of cold water. Perhaps a hose, certainly nothing resembling comfort. They are marched into a long, low building. The air inside is warm, astonishingly warm and humid. There is a smell of steam and disinfectant. They are told to strip, to leave their uniforms in piles. A few resist, suspicious. What if this is a trick? What if the showers are something else entirely? The propaganda has poisoned their minds with paranoia. But the American guards are patient, almost bored. They have done this 100 times. They motion the Germans forward. Reluctantly, the prisoners undress, and then they step into the shower room. The water is hot. Not lukewarm. Not tepid. Hot. It pours from dozens of shower heads mounted in the ceiling. A deluge of clean, steaming water that needles the skin and clouds the air. For a moment, the Germans simply stand there, frozen in disbelief. Some of them have not felt hot water on their bodies in over a year. The sensation is overwhelming. Josef Bauer, the Bavarian corporal, would later write that he felt his body unlock under the spray. Muscles he did not know were tense, suddenly relaxing, skin that had been numb with cold suddenly alive again. He could feel the dirt sluicing off, running in brown rivulets toward the drains. He could feel his scalp tingling as the water penetrated the grease and grime. He wanted to weep, but he did not. Not yet. Then the soap is distributed. Small bars, white and smooth, smelling faintly of lavender or lye. The Germans turn them over in their hands, uncomprehending. Soap. Real soap. Not the coarse, crumbling substitutes they had used in Germany. Made from clay and animal fat. Not the ersatz soap that left a film and smelled of chemicals. This was soap that lathered, that foamed, that made the skin feel clean. Some of the men use it tentatively, as if afraid it will vanish. Others scrub themselves with a kind of frenzy, working the lather into every crevice, desperate to erase the months of filth. The water around their feet turns gray, then brown, then black. An American medic moves among them, pointing to bottles of shampoo on a shelf. Shampoo. The word is foreign to many of them. The medic mimes washing his hair. A few of the Germans try it. The shampoo smells like flowers, roses, perhaps, or lilacs. It is absurdly, almost comically, luxurious. Hans Dressler, the sergeant, massages it into his scalp and watches as the lather turns dark with months of accumulated oil and dirt. He rinses, and rinses again, and still the water runs cloudy. He cannot remember the last time his hair felt light, felt clean. He cannot remember the last time he did not smell his own stink. The transformation is not merely physical. It is psychological. These men have been taught that deprivation is noble, that suffering is strength, that comfort is the privilege of the weak. And yet here, in the heart of the enemy nation, they are being given something they have not experienced in years: basic human dignity. The hot water does not distinguish between victor and vanquished. The soap does not care about ideology. For 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, they stand under the spray, and in that time, something fundamental shifts. The propaganda has told them that Americans are soft, that their wealth has made them decadent, but this is not decadence. This is abundance, and it is being extended to prisoners, to enemies, without hesitation, without cruelty. When the water finally shuts off, the silence is profound. The Germans stand dripping, their skin pink and raw, their hair slicked back, their bodies lighter than they have felt in months. They are handed towels thick, white, absorbent towels, not the thin rags they had used in the Wehrmacht. They dry themselves slowly, almost reverently. Some of them catch their reflections in the fogged mirrors lining one wall. They do not recognize themselves. The gaunt, filthy soldiers who entered the shower room are gone. In their place are men who look almost human again. They are led into an adjacent room where American military fatigues have been laid out in neat rows. The uniforms are clean, pressed, and stamped with the letters PW in large white paint on the back. The Germans are instructed to dress. They pick up the garments cautiously, expecting coarse fabric, scratchy wool, the kind of rough clothing that had been standard issue in the Wehrmacht for the past 2 years. Instead, they find cotton, soft cotton. The shirts are comfortable, the trousers fit, the socks are thick and free of holes. One prisoner, a young soldier from the Rhineland named Otto Kruger, would later describe the experience in a letter to his family. I put on the American clothes and felt as though I had been wrapped in a blanket. I had forgotten that clothing could feel good, but it is the underwear that astonishes them most. The Americans have provided each prisoner with 2 sets of clean, white cotton undergarments. 2 sets. In the Wehrmacht, underwear had been a luxury for officers. Enlisted men often went without, or wore the same pair for weeks until it disintegrated. And here, the Americans are giving each prisoner, each captured enemy, 2 fresh sets. As casually as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Hans Dressler holds a pair of briefs in his hand and stares at them. They are so white, so clean. He thinks of his own undergarments, left in a pile with his old uniform, gray with sweat and full of holes. He thinks of the propaganda that told him America was on the verge of collapse, that its factories were failing, that its people were hungry. And he realizes, with a clarity that feels almost painful, that he has been lied to. The soap, still faintly scented on their skin, becomes a kind of talisman in the days that follow. It is distributed regularly once a week, sometimes more often. The prisoners are allowed to shower twice a week, and each time, the water is hot. Each time, there is soap. They begin to hoard the small bars, tucking them into their footlockers, not because they fear running out, but because they cannot quite believe the supply is endless. They have spent years in a regime of scarcity, where everything was rationed, where even basic necessities were privileges to be earned or fought over. And now, in captivity, they have more soap than they had as free men. It becomes a symbol, not just of American wealth, but of American values. The hot showers and the soap are not instruments of propaganda. They are not dispensed as rewards for good behavior. They are simply given, automatically, as a matter of course. The Americans treat cleanliness not as a luxury, but as a right. This is a worldview so alien to the German prisoners that it takes time for them to fully grasp it. Some never do. But for others, Josef Bauer, Hans Dressler, Otto Kruger, the soap becomes a quiet revelation. It represents a society that produces so much that even its enemies can be kept clean. The days at Camp Devens settle into a rhythm. The prisoners wake at 6, wash at communal sinks with always hot water and soap. They eat breakfast, oatmeal, toast, coffee with real cream. The portions are generous. No one goes hungry. This, too, is a shock. In Germany, even before the war, meals had been plain, portions small. During the war, rations had dwindled to near starvation levels. Soldiers in the field subsisted on hard bread, watery soup, and ersatz coffee made from acorns. And here, in an enemy camp, they are eating better than they did as free men in Germany. After breakfast, work details. The prisoners are assigned to non-military labor, repairing roads, clearing brush, working in camp kitchens or laundries. The work is not hard. The American guards are not cruel. There are no beatings, no arbitrary punishments. The prisoners are paid a small wage in camp scrip, which they can use to buy cigarettes, candy, or toiletries at the camp store. Toiletries. The word itself is a luxury. They can buy razors, shaving cream, toothpaste, combs. They can maintain themselves. They are not reduced to animals. In the evenings, there are recreation periods. The prisoners play soccer, read books from a camp library stocked with German language novels, or attend educational lectures. Some take classes in English. Others learn carpentry or auto mechanics. The Americans encourage self-improvement. It is baffling. These are prisoners of war. They should be suffering. Instead, they are being educated, fed, kept clean, treated with a kind of bureaucratic benevolence that defies everything they were taught about the enemy. The soap remains a constant. In letters home, it appears again and again. We have soap, they write. Real soap, as much as we need. Think their sons and husbands are exaggerating or have gone mad. But it is true. And the truth of it, the simple, undeniable reality of hot water and soap, begins to erode the ideological certainties these men once held. Letters arrive from Germany. They are heavily censored, redacted by both German and American authorities, but the news they contain is bleak. Cities are in ruins. Food is scarce. Soap is a distant memory. One prisoner, a corporal named Friedrich Lang, receives a letter from his wife in Hamburg. She describes standing in line for 3 hours to receive a ration of coarse black bread. She describes her hands, cracked and bleeding from washing clothes in cold water without soap. She describes their daughter, who has developed sores on her scalp because there is no shampoo, no medicine, no way to stay clean. Friedrich reads the letter twice, then folds it carefully and tucks it into his footlocker, next to his bar of soap. The irony is crushing. He is a prisoner, and yet he is cleaner, healthier, better fed than his own family. He showers in hot water twice a week. He uses soap every day. He eats 3 meals. He sleeps in a bunk with clean sheets. His wife, a free woman in the fatherland, has none of these things. The cognitive dissonance is almost unbearable. How can this be? How can the defeated live better than the victors? The answer, slowly, begins to dawn on him. It is not that Germany has lost the war. It is that Germany was never as strong as the propaganda claimed. The rhetoric of hardness and sacrifice was not a choice, but a necessity born of scarcity. The Third Reich was always poor, always stretched, always one step from collapse. The Americans, by contrast, are so wealthy that they can afford to keep their prisoners in comfort. This is not cruelty disguised as kindness. This is genuine abundance, and it terrifies him, because it means that everything he believed, everything he fought for, was built on a lie. Others come to similar realizations. Joseph Bauer compares his daily ration of soap to the tiny, crumbling bar his mother wrote him about, which she is trying to make last a month. Hans Dressler thinks of the communal baths in his village, where the water was heated only once a week, and 10 families shared the same tub. Otto Kruger remembers the propaganda films that showed Americans as wasteful and decadent, and realizes that what the Nazis called decadence, the Americans call normalcy. The soap becomes a lens through which they see the war anew. It is not a grand ideological struggle. It is a war between a nation of scarcity and a nation of plenty. And they are on the losing side. One afternoon in late March 1945, an American medic named Lieutenant Robert Hayes gives a lecture to a group of prisoners. The topic is hygiene and disease prevention. But Hayes, a former schoolteacher from Ohio, veers into philosophy. Speaking through a translator, he explains that in America, cleanliness is considered a basic human right. It is not a luxury. It is not a reward. It is something every person deserves, regardless of their station. He talks about public health, about the campaigns to eradicate typhus and cholera, about the construction of water treatment plants and sewage systems. He talks about how democracy and hygiene are linked, how a society that values the individual must also value the individual's health and dignity. The Germans listen in silence. Some are skeptical. This sounds like propaganda. But Hayes is earnest, almost naive in his conviction. He believes what he is saying, and the evidence is all around them. The hot showers, the soap, the clean uniforms, the well-fed bodies. This is not a performance. This is how Americans actually live. They take hot showers every day. They use soap every day. They consider it normal. One prisoner raises his hand and asks, through the translator, whether this standard of living applies to all Americans or only the rich. Hayes laughs. Even the poorest Americans have running water and soap, he says. We have problems. Sure. Poverty, inequality. But nobody in America goes without a bath because there's no soap. The prisoner sits down, shaking his head. It is too much to believe. And yet, the soap in his pocket, the clean clothes on his body, the memory of hot water on his skin, all of it confirms Hayes's words. The abundance is real. The prisoners are allowed to write 1 letter per week. The letters are censored, but the censors are lenient. The Germans write to their families, to sweethearts, to mothers and fathers, and in letter after letter, they describe the soap, they describe the showers, they describe the cleanliness. They know it sounds absurd, even trivial, but they cannot help themselves. It is the detail that encapsulates everything. They give us soap, writes Otto Kruger. Every week, a new bar. It smells like roses. I have never smelled anything so clean. These letters, when they arrive in Germany, are met with disbelief. Some families think their sons have been brainwashed. Some think they are writing in code, that soap means something else. But others, reading between the lines, understand. Their men are safe. They are being treated well. They are not suffering. And in the context of total war, where every German city is being bombed, where food is running out, where the Reich is collapsing, this is a kind of miracle. Back at Camp Devens, the prisoners begin to hoard American soap, not for themselves, but to send home. When the Red Cross allows small parcels to be sent to Germany, the prisoners include bars of soap, carefully wrapped. They know it is a pittance. That 1 bar cannot alleviate the suffering of their families, but it is something. It is a tangible piece of the abundance they have discovered. Some of the men cry when they pack these parcels. They are sending soap to wives who have not bathed properly in months, to children who are dirty and lice-ridden, to mothers who are washing clothes in cold water with ash, because there is no soap to be had in all of Germany. The soap becomes a message. It says, I am alive, I am clean, I am being treated well. And implicitly, it says something else. You were lied to. We were all lied to. Not all the prisoners at Camp Devens are from the Western Front. A number of them are veterans of the East, men who fought in Russia, who witnessed the brutal conditions of the Ostfront. For these men, the contrast is even more jarring. They remember the lice that infested every bunker, every trench, every piece of clothing. They remember the skin diseases that spread through entire battalions because there was no soap, no hot water, no way to stay clean. They remember the smell of unwashed bodies, of gangrene, of death. One such veteran, a sergeant named Erich Vogel, had spent 2 winters on the Eastern Front. He had not had a hot bath in 18 months. He had learned to sleep despite the lice crawling on his skin, had learned to ignore the infections that festered in the creases of his body. He had watched men die of typhus, of dysentery, of diseases that should have been preventable. And when he was captured in Belgium and brought to America, when he stood under that first hot shower and felt the water wash away nearly 2 years of accumulated filth, he broke down. He wept openly, his body shaking, his hands clutching the bar of soap as if it were a sacred relic. Later, in the barracks, he tries to explain it to another prisoner. On the Eastern Front, he says, we were not human. We were animals. We lived in mud and blood. We stank, and we told ourselves it was necessary, that this was what soldiers did, that the enemy was worse. But here, he gestures around the clean barracks, the laundered sheets, the soap dish on the shelf. Here, they treat us like human beings. They give us soap. They let us be clean. Do you understand? They let us be clean. The other prisoner nods slowly. He understands. The soap is not just soap. It is a restoration of humanity. It is proof that civilization still exists, even in the midst of total war, and it is being offered by the enemy, the people they were taught to despise. As the weeks turn into months, the prisoners begin to understand that the soap, the hot showers, the clean clothes, all of it is part of a larger philosophy. The Americans are not kind because they are naive. They are kind because they can afford to be. Their wealth is so vast, their productive capacity so enormous, that even the basic necessities, soap, water, food, are abundant. This abundance shapes their worldview. They believe in individual dignity because they have the resources to uphold it. They believe in human rights because scarcity has not forced them to ration humanity. In contrast, the Third Reich was built on scarcity. Every resource was hoarded, every calorie counted, every bar of soap a luxury. The Nazi ideology of hardness and sacrifice was not a philosophy, it was a coping mechanism for a nation that never had enough. And when scarcity defines a society, cruelty becomes policy. You cannot afford to treat prisoners well when your own people are starving. You cannot afford compassion when every resource is needed for the war machine. The prisoners see this now. They see that the hot showers and the soap are not random acts of generosity. They are the products of a system that values abundance over austerity, that believes prosperity can be shared rather than hoarded. It is a fundamentally different worldview, and it is embodied in something as simple as a bar of soap. Joseph Bauer writes in his diary, "I thought we were strong because we could endure deprivation. But what if strength is not endurance, but abundance? What if the ability to provide for everyone, even your enemies, is the true measure of power?" It is a dangerous thought. It undermines everything he was taught. But he cannot unthink it. The soap smells too clean. The water is too hot. The evidence is too overwhelming. In May 1945, Germany surrenders. The news reaches Camp Devens on a warm spring afternoon. The prisoners gather in the yard, listening to the announcement over loudspeakers. Some weep, some are silent. Some feel a strange sense of relief. The war is over. They have survived. But the question remains, what now? The International Red Cross begins compiling reports on the treatment of prisoners in American camps. Inspectors visit Camp Devens. They interview the prisoners, expecting complaints of mistreatment, malnutrition, abuse. Instead, they find something unexpected. The prisoners praise the conditions. They talk about the food, the medical care, the recreation. And again, they mention the soap. "We are given soap every week," one prisoner tells an inspector. "We can shower in hot water. We are kept clean. This is more than we had in the Wehrmacht." The inspector, a Swiss national named Henri Blanc, is skeptical. He has visited camps in other countries. He has seen the horrors of Dachau, the starvation of Soviet POW camps, and yet, here in America, the prisoners look healthy. They are clean. They are, by all appearances, being treated humanely. In his report, Blanc writes, "The cleanliness of the prisoners at Camp Devens is remarkable. They are provided with regular access to hot showers and soap, a standard that exceeds the minimum requirements of the Geneva Convention. This attention to hygiene reflects the broader American approach to prisoner welfare, which emphasizes not merely survival, but dignity." The report is filed with the Red Cross and circulated to member nations. It becomes part of the historical record, and in that record, the soap appears as evidence not of American propaganda, but of American abundance. Years later, long after the war, when the prisoners have returned to Germany and begun the slow process of rebuilding their lives, they will remember the soap. It will appear in memoirs, in interviews, in letters to children and grandchildren. They will describe it in detail. The weight of it in their hand, the smell of it, the way it lathered, the way the hot water felt on their skin. They will remember it as the moment when the ideology of hardness began to crack, when the propaganda could no longer hold against the evidence of their own senses. Joseph Bauer, returning to Bavaria, will become a teacher. He will tell his students about the soap. He will explain that the war was not lost because Germany lacked courage or strength, but because it lacked resources. He will teach them that abundance, not austerity, is the foundation of a just society. His students will not always believe him, but he will keep teaching, because he cannot forget the feeling of hot water on his skin, the smell of soap that smelled like roses. Hans Dressler will write a memoir. In it, he will devote an entire chapter to the showers at Camp Devens. He will describe the steam, the heat, the way the dirt ran off his body in black streams. He will write, "I learned more about America in that shower than I did in 1,000 hours of propaganda. They did not need to tell us they were wealthy. They showed us. They gave us soap." Otto Kruger will become a social worker. He will work with refugees, with the displaced, with people who have lost everything, and he will fight for their right to basic dignity, food, shelter, and cleanliness. When people ask him why cleanliness matters so much, he will tell them about the soap. He will tell them about standing under a hot shower in an American POW camp and realizing, for the first time, that he was still a human being. The soap becomes a symbol, not of defeat, but of transformation. It represents the moment when ideology met reality and shattered. It represents the power of abundance to change minds, to undermine certainty, to reveal the hollowness of propaganda. The Nazis had told the prisoners that America was weak, decadent, on the verge of collapse. But the soap proved otherwise. The soap was evidence of a nation so strong it could afford to treat its enemies with dignity. And that evidence could not be ignored. In the end, the story of the German POWs and the American soap is not a story about cleanliness. It is a story about values. The hot showers and the soap were not policy decisions made at the highest levels of government. They were the natural expression of a society that believed in abundance, in individual dignity, in the idea that even an enemy deserved to be treated as a human being. This was not propaganda. It was philosophy made manifest in daily life. The Third Reich had built its ideology on scarcity. It glorified suffering because suffering was all it could offer. It demanded sacrifice because it had nothing else to give. And when its soldiers encountered a society that could offer something more, something as simple as hot water and soap, the ideology collapsed. You cannot maintain a worldview based on deprivation when confronted with overwhelming evidence of plenty. The prisoners carried that evidence home with them. They carried it in their memories, in their letters, in the bars of soap they tried to send to their families, and slowly, quietly, that evidence helped rebuild Germany. The men who had showered in American camps, who had been given soap and treated with dignity, returned to their ruined cities with a new understanding. They had seen what abundance could do. They had felt its power, and they knew, with a certainty that no propaganda could shake, that the future belonged not to the ideology of hardness, but to the philosophy of plenty. The soap, in the end, was more than a bar of soap. It was a promise that civilization could be more than survival, that society could provide for all its members, that even in the midst of total war, humanity could endure. It was a small thing, almost trivial, and yet, it changed everything. February 1945. A Liberty ship docks in Boston. 317 German soldiers step into the cold New England air, expecting brutality. Instead, they are given soap, and in that moment, the war is already over. Not because of bombs or battles, but because ideology cannot survive contact with abundance. The soap smells like roses. The water is hot. And the truth, once felt, cannot be unfelt. That is the legacy of the shower. That is the power of soap.